The small bell above the door of Rosie's diner jingled as another customer walked in. Maylin looked up from the counter she was wiping down and forced a smile. Her shift had started at 6 a.m. and now, 12 hours later, her feet throbbed inside her worn-out sneakers, but she couldn't show it. Tips were what kept her afloat. "I'll be right with you," she called out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The clock on the wall seemed to mock her. 6 more hours to go on this double shift. The diner sat on a corner in downtown Chicago, a modest establishment with checkerboard floors and red vinyl booths that had seen better days. It wasn't fancy, but it had character, as the owner, Mrs. Wu, liked to say. Character and an old upright piano tucked in the corner that nobody ever played. Nobody except May when the place emptied out at night. May grabbed her notepad and made her way to the new customer, a businessman in a wrinkled suit who barely looked up from his phone as he ordered coffee and apple pie. She nodded and headed to the kitchen, her muscles working on autopilot after years of the same routine. "Order up," called Hank, the cook, sliding a plate of eggs and bacon across the counter. His face was flushed from the heat of the grill, but he still managed to wink at May. "How's my favorite waitress holding up?" "Oh, you know," she shrugged, balancing 3 plates on her arm with practiced ease. One foot in front of the other. What she didn't say was how her fingers had been itching all day, how melodies swirled in her head even as she poured coffee and calculated tips. Music was her secret language, one she'd been fluent in since childhood. The lunch rush kept her busy enough to push those thoughts aside. She moved between tables with grace, remembering who wanted extra ketchup and who needed a refill without being asked. The regulars liked that about her, how she seemed to anticipate their needs before they voiced them. "You're an angel," said Mrs. Petrovich, an elderly woman who came in every Tuesday for split pea soup. She pressed a $5 bill into May's hand. "You remember my grandson? The one studying medicine?" May nodded. She'd heard about the grandson at least a dozen times. "Well, he's coming to visit next month. Such a handsome boy, and single." Mrs. Petrovich raised her eyebrows meaningfully. "That's wonderful," May replied, pocketing the tip with a polite smile. She didn't have the heart to tell Mrs. Petrovich that romance was the last thing on her mind these days. Between working 70 hours a week and trying to keep up with rent, she barely had time to sleep, let alone date. The afternoon dragged on. A family with 3 noisy children left a mess of spilled milk and scattered crayons. A teenager nursed a single cup of coffee for 2 hours, occupying a prime booth. A couple argued in hushed, tense voices, leaving without touching their food. Through it all, May maintained her composure, though her smile grew more strained as the hours passed. At 8 p.m., the evening rush finally began to thin. May's replacement, a college student named Zoe, arrived late as usual, full of breathless apologies about a study group that ran long. "It's fine," May assured her, though her back ached from lifting heavy trays and her hands were raw from hot water and harsh soap. "Just help me clear these tables before you clock in." By 9 p.m., she'd handed over her section to Zoe and retreated to the break room to count her tips. $67.35. Not great, but not terrible either. She tucked the money into an envelope marked rent in her purse. 3 more shifts like this and she'd have enough for this month's payment. Outside, the city hummed with nightlife. People in nice clothes headed to bars and clubs, laughing together as they passed the diner windows. May watched them for a moment, remembering a time when she'd been part of that world, when music school scholarships had promised a different future. That was before her grandmother got sick, before the medical bills piled up, before May had to make the choice between pursuing her passion and keeping a roof over their heads. "You're still here?" Mrs. Wu appeared in the doorway, her small frame casting a long shadow in the dim light of the break room. Though in her 60s, she moved with the energy of someone much younger, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Just heading out," May said, pulling on her jacket. Mrs. Wu studied her face. "You look tired, child. When was the last time you took a day off?" May couldn't remember. The days blended together lately, an endless cycle of serving food, smiling at strangers, falling into bed exhausted, then waking to do it all over again. "I'm fine," she insisted. "Just need some sleep." Mrs. Wu looked unconvinced but didn't press the issue. Instead, she said, "The delivery man comes early tomorrow. I need someone to sign for it. Can you open?" May hesitated. Opening meant arriving at 5 a.m. to start the coffee and prep the grill, but it also meant extra hours on her paycheck. Of course, she agreed. Mrs. Wu nodded, then glanced at the clock. It's quiet now. Why don't you play for a bit before you go? It might help you relax. The piano. May's heart quickened at the suggestion. The old upright in the corner was out of tune and had a sticky B-flat key, but to her, it was more precious than gold. Mrs. Wu had discovered May playing it after hours one night, 3 years ago, and instead of being angry about an employee staying late, she'd been enchanted. Since then, she'd given May an open invitation to use the piano whenever the diner was empty. Maybe just for a few minutes, May said, trying to sound casual. In truth, those stolen moments at the piano were what kept her sane. The dining area was nearly empty now, just a couple finishing their dessert in a far corner booth. May made her way to the piano, her fatigue momentarily forgotten. She sat on the worn bench and let her fingers hover over the keys, feeling the familiar rush of anticipation. She began with something simple, a gentle melody she'd composed after her grandmother passed away. The notes flowed from her fingers, soft and melancholy at first, then building in complexity. She closed her eyes, letting the music take her somewhere else, somewhere the smell of grease didn't cling to her clothes and her feet didn't ache from standing all day. The couple in the corner stopped, talking. Mrs. Wu paused her bookkeeping. Even Hank stuck his head out from the kitchen. But May noticed none of this. She was lost in the music, her body swaying slightly as her fingers danced across the keys. When she'd been younger, her grandmother had scraped together enough money for piano lessons, recognizing her talent early. Music is in our blood, she'd told May. Your grandfather played for the symphony back home. Your mother sang like an angel. These were people May had never met. Her grandfather had died before she was born, and her mother had passed away during childbirth. But through music, she felt connected to them. For 6 years, she'd studied with a retired concert pianist who lived in their building, practicing on a keyboard her grandmother had bought secondhand. She'd won small competitions, earned a reputation as a prodigy in their neighborhood. Then came the scholarship offer to a prestigious music school when she was 17, a full ride, a dream come true. 2 months later, her grandmother had the first stroke. The second one came a year later, leaving her partially paralyzed and unable to work. The choice had been impossible but necessary. May withdrew from school to care for the only family she had left. The last notes of her composition faded away. She opened her eyes, startled to find tears on her cheeks. Quickly, she wiped them away, embarrassed to have gotten so emotional in public. Even if public was just a nearly empty diner. The couple in the booth was watching her, the woman's mouth slightly open in surprise. Then they began to applaud, the sound jarring in the quiet space. Play another, the man called out. May smiled and shook her head, suddenly self-conscious. I should get going, she said, standing from the bench. As she gathered her things to leave, the woman from the booth approached her. That was beautiful, she said. Are you a professional? May laughed softly. No, just a waitress. Well, you shouldn't be just anything, the woman replied. You have a gift. The compliment warmed her, but May had heard similar words before. Gifts didn't pay bills. Talent didn't put food on the table. Dreams were luxuries she couldn't afford right now. She thanked the woman and headed for the door, pulling her jacket tighter as she stepped into the cool night air. The city lights blurred around her as fatigue settled back into her bones. Tomorrow would be another long day. But for those few minutes at the piano, she'd remembered who she used to be, who she still was, underneath the waitress uniform and the weary smile. The music still lived inside her, waiting, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. 3 weeks passed, each day blending into the next like watercolors on wet paper. May opened the diner most mornings, served the breakfast crowd their eggs and coffee, worked through lunch, and sometimes stayed for dinner service too. The routine was exhausting but familiar, a life measured out in coffee spoons and tip dollars. On a particularly busy Thursday, May hardly noticed the 3 young women who took a corner booth during the lunch rush. They ordered sandwiches and milkshakes, lingering long after they'd finished eating, huddled over a phone and whispering. When May brought their check, the tallest one, a girl with bright blue hair, looked up with a strange smile. You're her, right? The piano girl? May blinked in surprise. Excuse me? We saw a video of you playing here the other night. Someone posted it online. It's getting tons of views. A cold feeling washed over May. A video? Of me? The second girl nodded eagerly. It's amazing. You were playing something really beautiful. Like not regular piano music, you know? Something different. The third girl held up her phone. Look, that's you, isn't it? Sure enough, there on the small screen was May, her back to the camera, sitting at the diner's old upright piano. The video was clearly taken recently. She recognized the red sweater she'd worn last week. As she watched, her recorded self began to play a piece she'd composed after a particularly hard day, when a rude customer had made her cry in the bathroom. The music had been her way of transforming that hurt into something else. Who recorded this? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Blue-haired girl pointed toward the kitchen. Zoe said her boyfriend filmed it last week. He thought you were really good. May felt her face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. Those moments at the piano were private, her one sanctuary in a life that offered few comforts. To have someone record her without permission felt like a violation. Almost 50,000 views already, the girl with the phone said. People are asking who you are in the comments. May didn't know what to say. She'd never wanted attention. She played for herself, not an audience. Certainly not an online audience of strangers. She mumbled something about needing to get back to work and hurried away, her hands shaking slightly as she bussed a nearby table. During her break, she found the video herself. The quality wasn't great, filmed from across the diner with a phone camera, but the sound came through clearly. May watched herself play, transfixed by how different she looked when lost in music. The tension left her shoulders, her face softened. She seemed like another person entirely. The comments below the video ranged from casual praise to outright amazement. Who is this? She's incredible. Better than half the professional pianists I've heard. That's not a classical piece, is it? Did she write this? May closed the app and put her phone away, unsure how to feel. Part of her was angry at the invasion of privacy, but another part, a part she'd tried to silence for years, felt a tiny flicker of validation. People had responded to her music. They'd heard something in it that touched them. When she returned to the dining room, Mrs. Wu called her over. The older woman's face was unreadable as she said, "You've become famous, it seems." "I'm sorry about the video," May said quickly. "I had no idea anyone was filming." Mrs. Wu waved away her apology. "Why be sorry? It's good for business. 3 people came in today asking if you would be playing tonight. What did you tell them?" I said perhaps. "If my best waitress isn't too tired?" Mrs. Wu's eyes twinkled. "The dinner shift is covered if you want to go home and rest before playing tonight. I can put a small sign in the window. Nothing big, just live piano at 8. May felt panic rise in her throat. "I can't perform for people, Mrs. Wu. I play for myself. And what is the difference? You play, people listen. They were listening before, but now more will come." She patted May's arm. "Think about it. Go home, sleep a little. Come back if you want. No pressure." But there was pressure. The weight of expectation, the fear of disappointing others, the terror of being truly seen. May had spent years making herself invisible, blending into the background of other people's lives as she served their food and cleared their plates. The thought of stepping into the spotlight made her stomach churn. She walked home in a daze, the autumn wind cutting through her thin jacket. Her apartment was small, just 1 room plus a bathroom in a building that had seen better days. But it was clean and it was hers. On the wall hung the only decoration she'd bothered with, a framed photograph of her grandmother smiling in front of the keyboard they'd saved up to buy. "What would you tell me to do, Nai?" May whispered to the photograph. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice, practical yet encouraging. "Talent hidden is talent wasted. Music is meant to be shared." May sighed and lay down on her bed, not bothering to take off her shoes. She was asleep within minutes, exhaustion claiming her. When she woke, the room was dark. Her phone showed 7:15 p.m. If she hurried, she could make it back to the diner by 8. But should she? The question followed her into the shower, clung to her as she changed clothes, whispered in her ear as she walked to the bus stop. The diner looked different at night. Through the windows, May could see it was busier than usual for a Thursday. Her stomach tightened when she spotted the small chalkboard sign by the entrance. "Live piano tonight, 8 p.m. Mrs. Wu met her at the door with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "You came, good. I saved you some dinner in the back. I don't know if I can eat right now, May admitted. Nonsense. Artists need strength. Mrs. Wu steered her toward the kitchen where a plate of dumplings waited. Eat, then play whatever you want. These people, they came because they saw something special in that video. Show them what else you can do. As she picked at the food, May could feel eyes on her. Customers sneaking glances, whispering. Her hands trembled slightly. What if she froze? What if she played badly? What if they were disappointed? Zoe appeared in the doorway, looking apologetic. Hey, I'm really sorry about the video thing. Chen didn't mean any harm. He just thought you were amazing and wanted to share it. May nodded, not quite ready to forgive, but too nervous to hold a grudge right now. It's fine. There's someone here you might want to meet, Zoe continued. A guy who says he's a talent scout for that big TV competition. You know, America's Next Musical Star. He saw the video and came to hear you in person. May nearly choked on a dumpling. What? He's sitting by the window. Blue suit, glasses. Said he'd wait all night if he had to. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. A talent scout? From that show everyone watched? It had to be a joke. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. But when she peeked out into the dining area, there he was. A thin man in a neatly pressed suit, checking his watch and sipping coffee. He looked official, important. The kind of person who could change someone's life with a single decision. I can't do this, May whispered, backing away. Mrs. Wu appeared behind her, gentle but firm. Yes, you can. Remember what you told me about your grandmother? How she believed music was in your blood? She was right. I hear it every time you play. But what if I'm not good enough? Not good enough for what? To share something beautiful? To make people feel something? Mrs. Wu shook her head. The only failure is not trying. The clock on the wall read 8:05 p.m. The diner had gone strangely quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath. Through the kitchen doorway, May could see the old upright piano waiting, its worn bench empty. She thought about all the nights she'd played after closing. The music a release for feelings she couldn't express any other way. She thought about her grandmother's sacrifices to pay for lessons, about the scholarship she'd had to give up, about the melodies that still filled her head even on the hardest days. Mrs. Wu pressed a glass of water into her hands. Drink, then decide. May took a sip, the cold water clearing her head a little. What if this changes nothing? What if it's just some guy who makes promises and then disappears? Then tomorrow you're still a waitress who plays beautiful piano. Mrs. Wu shrugged. But what if it changes everything? That question hung in the air between them, full of possibility and terror. May set down the glass, wiped her damp palms on her jeans, and took a deep breath. Okay, she said finally. I'll play. As she walked toward the piano, the murmur of conversation died away. She felt every eye in the place watching her, including the man in the blue suit who sat up straighter as she approached the instrument. The familiar bench creaked as she sat down. She placed her hands on the keys, noticing a small chip on her nail polish, the callus on her right thumb from years of carrying heavy trays. For a terrifying moment, her mind went blank. Then she closed her eyes, shutting out the watching faces, the expectations, the fear. She thought of her grandmother, of the music that had sustained her through the hardest times, of the melodies that were hers alone. Her fingers found the keys, and she began to play. The man in the blue suit was named Raymond Park, and he talked faster than anyone May had ever met. Words tumbled out of him as they sat in a booth after her performance, his hands moving constantly as if conducting an invisible orchestra. Raw talent, that's what the show needs. Not these polished conservatory types who've been groomed since birth. Someone real. Someone with a story. He paused to gulp his coffee. Your video hit something in people. Authenticity. I must have watched it 20 times myself. May sat quietly, still trembling slightly from the adrenaline of playing for a crowded room. The applause afterward had been overwhelming. People standing, cheering, some even wiping away tears. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected any of this. The auditions are in 3 days, Raymond continued, sliding a business card across the table. Saturday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. The address is on the back. Bring ID and be prepared to play 2 pieces. Something classical to show technique and something original to show personality. I don't know if I can, May began. But Raymond cut her off. Of course you can. What I just heard? He kissed his fingertips like a chef appreciating a perfect dish. That's exactly what we're looking for. Trust me, I've been doing this for 15 years. From behind the counter, Mrs. Wu watched them with barely concealed excitement. The other customers had gradually left, but she'd kept the diner open, sensing that something important was happening in that corner booth. 3 days isn't much time to prepare, May said, turning the business card over in her hands. The show's logo was embossed in gold on one side, the audition address printed on the other. You've been preparing your whole life, Raymond replied simply. Just do what you did tonight and you'll be fine. After he left, promising to email her the registration forms, May sat alone in the booth, trying to process what had just happened. Mrs. Wu brought her tea, then slid in across from her. So? The older woman prompted, her eyes bright with anticipation. He wants me to audition for America's Next Musical Star on Saturday. And you will go, yes? May stared into her teacup. I don't know. It seems crazy. Things like this don't happen to people like me. And why not people like you? Mrs. Wu asked sharply. Who deserves a chance more than someone who works hard and has true talent? Outside, the city lights blinked against the darkness. A siren wailed in the distance. Life went on as usual, even as May felt her own world shifting beneath her feet. I don't have anything to wear, she said weakly. I don't have a proper piece prepared. I haven't played in front of judges since I was a teenager. Excuses, Mrs. Wu said, waving her hand dismissively. You are afraid, which is normal. But fear is a bad reason not to try. Deep down, May knew she was right. The real reason for her hesitation went beyond practical concerns. For years, she'd pushed her dreams aside, telling herself that music was a luxury she couldn't afford. Opening that door again meant facing the possibility of another disappointment, another loss. What about the diner? She asked. My shifts? Zoe can cover for you. And Hank's nephew needs work, he can help too. Mrs. Wu reached across the table to pat May's hand. For 3 days you practice. I will even close the diner early tomorrow so you can use the piano all night if you want. Tears pricked at May's eyes. Why are you doing this for me? Mrs. Wu's expression softened. When my husband and I came to this country, we had many dreams. Some came true, some did not. But the worst feeling is wondering what if. I don't want that for you. That night, May barely slept. She lay awake, scrolling through videos of past America's Next Musical Star contestants on her phone. They were all so polished, so confident. Their performances had dramatic lighting and professional backing tracks. How could she possibly compete with that? Yet when she finally drifted off near dawn, it was with the memory of Raymond's words echoing in her head. Raw talent. That's what the show needs. The next 2 days passed in a blur. True to her word, Mrs. Wu closed the diner early both evenings, and May practiced until her fingers ached. She chose Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major for her classical piece. Challenging enough to showcase technique, but with room for emotional interpretation. For her original composition, she refined the piece she'd played when the video was taken, adding complexity while preserving its heart. Zoe surprised her by showing up with a garment bag on Friday afternoon. My roommate works at a boutique, she explained, unzipping the bag to reveal a simple but elegant navy blue dress. She said you can borrow this for the audition. It's last season, but still nice. I can't accept, May began, but Zoe interrupted. Consider it an apology for the whole video thing. Besides, we're all rooting for you. Even Hank made you something. The cook emerged from the kitchen carrying a container of his special dumplings, the ones he only made for staff birthdays. For tomorrow, he said gruffly. Brain food. May felt a lump form in her throat. These people, who'd been just co-workers a week ago, had become an unexpected support system. Saturday morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through May's thin curtains. She'd barely slept again, her mind cycling through all the ways today could go wrong. What if she forgot the notes? What if the judges hated her style? What if she made a fool of herself on national television? She forced herself out of bed and into the shower, letting the hot water wash away some of her anxiety. As she dressed, she looked at her grandmother's photograph. I wish you were here, she whispered. I wish you could see this. The audition venue was a downtown hotel where the show had rented several ballrooms. When May arrived, 30 minutes early despite getting lost twice on the bus route, she found a line already stretching around the block. Hundreds of hopefuls clutched instruments, shuffled sheet music, and vocalized quietly. She joined the end of the line, the borrowed dress feeling strange against her skin after years of jeans and t-shirts. The woman in front of her, a violinist in her 40s, turned to chat nervously. "Second time trying out," she confided. "Last year I made it to the producer round, but no further. The main judges never even saw me. They say they see about 1 in 50 who register." May's stomach clenched. 1 in 50? More or less. They have to filter somehow. The woman gestured to the crowd. "Most people here are good. Being good isn't enough." The line inched forward slowly. Inside her bag, May's phone buzzed with encouraging texts from Mrs. Wu and the diner staff. It was strange to have people believing in her so strongly when she barely believed in herself. After 2 hours of waiting, she finally reached the registration table. A harried production assistant checked her ID, handed her a numbered sticker, and directed her to a holding room where dozens of other contestants sat in tense silence or practiced soundlessly on unplugged keyboards. Another hour passed. May's number was called along with 9 others. They were led to a different room, where a young man with a clipboard explained the process. "You'll audition in groups of 5. Each person gets exactly 2 minutes, no more. A bell will ring when your time is up, and you must stop immediately. The producer panel will ask questions after everyone in your group has performed. No talking during other performances. No leaving the room until dismissed. Clear?" May nodded along with the others, her mouth dry. She was placed in the second group, which meant watching 5 people perform before her turn. They filed into yet another room, this one set up with a grand piano on a small stage. 3 people sitting at a table facing it. The first contestant, a young man with a violin, played flawlessly, his technique impeccable, his expression intense. The judges' faces revealed nothing. The second was a teenage girl who sang an aria that made the hairs on May's arms stand up. The third was a pianist who blazed through a Liszt piece so complicated that May felt her confidence withering with each note. "Number 1458, the clipboard man called. May stood on shaky legs. This was her chance, maybe her only one. As she approached the piano, she remembered Mrs. Wu's words. "The worst feeling is wondering, what if?" She sat at the bench, adjusting it slightly, then looked up at the judges. 2 men and a woman, all with impassive expressions and notebooks ready. "Name and what you'll be performing," one of the men said without looking up. "May Lin. I'll be playing Nocturne in E-flat major by Chopin, followed by an original piece called After Closing. You have 2 minutes. Begin when ready." May placed her hands on the keys. The piano was magnificent, responsive in a way the diner's old upright could never be. She took a deep breath and began to play. The nocturne flowed from her fingers, the familiar notes carrying her away from the sterile audition room, away from the judge's scrutiny. She allowed herself to lean into the emotional heart of the piece, adding subtle rubato where others might have played it straight. When she transitioned to her original composition, something shifted in the room. One of the judges looked up from his notes. Another stopped writing entirely. The woman leaned forward slightly in her chair. After Closing was May's love letter to her late-night sessions at the diner piano, moments of freedom stolen between long shifts and exhausted sleep. It incorporated elements of classical structure but broke rules freely, following emotional logic rather than traditional harmony. The timer bell rang just as she reached the final phrase. Her hands froze above the keys, the unfinished ending hanging in the air between her and the judges. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the female judge cleared her throat. "You wrote that second piece yourself?" May nodded. "Yes." "Based on what exactly?" "On working at a diner," May said, suddenly feeling foolish. "On serving people all day and then playing piano when everyone's gone?" The judges exchanged glances. The woman made a note, then nodded. "Thank you. Next, please." As May stood to leave the piano, her legs still trembling, she couldn't tell if she'd done well or poorly. The judges' poker faces revealed nothing. But she had done it. She had played her heart out on that stage. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't have to wonder what if. In the hallway, clipboard man directed her to yet another waiting room. "Producer callbacks will be posted in 1 hour," he said. "If your number isn't on the list, thank you for your participation." May found a chair in the corner of the crowded room and finally let out the breath she felt like she'd been holding all morning. She'd played for the judges. Now all she could do was wait. The waiting room buzzed with nervous energy. Some contestants practiced silently, mouthing lyrics or moving their fingers through invisible scales. Others chatted in hushed tones, comparing experiences or exchanging contact information. A few stared at their phones, refreshing social media feeds as if answers might appear there. May sat alone, the borrowed navy dress smooth against her knees. She'd texted Mrs. Wu a brief update, audition done, waiting for results, but couldn't bring herself to add details about how it went. The truth was she didn't know. The classical piece had felt solid enough, but her original composition, playing something so personal for strangers with clipboards and stone faces, had left her feeling oddly vulnerable, as if she'd handed them her diary and asked for a critique. A production assistant entered the room with a tablet, and everyone fell silent. When I call your number, please proceed through the doors on the right for the next round. If your number is not called, thank you for your participation. There will be no feedback provided at this stage. May's heart hammered against her ribs as numbers began to be called out. Each one that wasn't hers felt like a small rejection. 3041, 1422. She closed her eyes, trying to prepare herself for disappointment. After all, what were the odds? Thousands of people had shown up today. Most would be going home. 58. Her eyes snapped open. Had she imagined it? But no, the production assistant was looking around the room expectantly. Number 1458? He repeated. May stood on wobbly legs. That's me. He checked something off on his tablet. Through the doors on the right, please. She grabbed her bag and moved toward the indicated doors, feeling dazed. Behind her, more numbers were being called, but she barely registered them. She'd made it through. Against all odds, she'd made it through. The next room was smaller, with about 20 people seated in folding chairs. Raymond Park stood at the front, looking pleased as May entered. Excellent, he said when everyone was assembled. Congratulations on making it past the producer round. Less than 10% of today's contestants have reached this point. A murmur went through the group, a mixture of pride and renewed anxiety. Now comes the real test, Raymond continued. You'll be auditioning for our celebrity judges. This is the panel you've seen on TV, the ones whose approval can change your life overnight. He went on to explain the process. Each contestant would get 3 minutes instead of 2. The judges might ask questions or request a different piece. The performances would be filmed for potential broadcast. They should be prepared for anything. The good news, he added with a wink, is that you've already impressed some very hard-to-impress people. The bad news is that the celebrity judges are even tougher. They're looking for that special something, the X factor that can't be taught. As they were led to yet another waiting area, May's phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Any news? She replied quickly, made it to judge round. Performing soon. Almost instantly, responses flooded in from the diner crew. Go me. We knew it. Mrs. Wu is telling all the customers. A smile tugged at her lips despite her nerves. Back at Rosie's diner, they were rooting for her. Somehow that thought was both comforting and terrifying. What if she let them down? The next 2 hours crawled by. Contestants were called one by one, disappearing through a set of double doors. Some returning with tears of joy, others with forced smiles masking disappointment. When May's turn finally came, a woman with a headset led her through a maze of corridors. They paused outside another set of doors while the woman checked her appearance. Mic pack is secure. Remember to walk to the mark on the floor, the X in tape, before introducing yourself. Look at the judges when speaking, not at the cameras. Ready? May nodded, though ready was the furthest thing from how she felt. The doors swung open and suddenly she was walking into a transformed ballroom. Lights blazed from all directions. 4 cameras tracked her movement. And there, behind a long table decorated with the show's logo, sat 3 people whose faces she'd seen countless times on television and billboards. On the left, music producer Dmitry Volkov, known for his brutally honest critiques. In the center, pop icon Lucia Reyes, whose songs had topped charts for over a decade. And on the right, classical pianist Thomas Harper, whose recordings of Beethoven had won multiple Grammy Awards. May's mouth went dry as she walked to the X on the floor. The spotlights were blinding, making the judges' faces hard to see clearly. Hello, she managed, her voice sounding strange in her own ears. My name is May Lin, I'm 26 and I'm from Chicago. What do you do in Chicago, May? Lucia asked, her voice warm and encouraging. I'm a waitress at a diner called Rosie's. A waitress? Dimitri's eyebrows rose slightly. No formal music training? I studied piano from age 7 to 17. I was on scholarship at the Chicago Academy of Music, but I had to leave during my first year when my grandmother got sick. Thomas Harper leaned forward. And you've maintained your skills while working full-time? That's impressive dedication. May thought about the late nights at the diner piano, the way music had been her refuge even when she'd been too exhausted to do anything else. Playing helps me make sense of things. It's not really something I could give up even when life got complicated. The judges exchanged glances. Something about her answer seemed to interest them. What will you be playing for us today? Lucia asked. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, followed by an original piece called After Closing. Thomas nodded approvingly at the Chopin choice. Whenever you're ready. May approached the grand piano at the center of the stage. It was even more magnificent than the one from the producer round, a concert Steinway that probably cost more than she'd earn in 10 years at the diner. She took a deep breath, placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The nocturne flowed more naturally this time, her fingers finding the notes without conscious thought. She allowed herself to sink into the music, forgetting the cameras, the judges, the stakes. There was only the melody, the harmony, the conversation between her hands. When she finished the classical piece, she paused briefly. Now came the moment of truth, her own composition, the piece that had divided the producer panel earlier. May closed her eyes for a second, remembering the diner after closing time. The smell of coffee and grease still hanging in the air, the squeak of the bench, the sticky B-flat key, the way the music had poured out of her on nights when the day's frustrations and disappointments threatened to overwhelm her. She began to play After Closing, but this time, she added something new, a passage she'd composed just last night, thinking about her grandmother, about Mrs. Wu, about all the people who had believed in her when she'd stopped believing in herself. The notes built to a crescendo more powerful than in the producer round, then resolved into a gentle, hopeful conclusion. In the silence that followed, she could hear her own heartbeat. When she looked up, Thomas Harper was writing furiously in his notebook. Lucia Reyes was blinking rapidly as if fighting tears, and Dmitry Volkov, known for his poker face, was sitting back in his chair with an expression she couldn't quite read. That was your own composition? He asked finally. May nodded. Yes. Inspired by your work at the diner? By that and everything, I guess. Life doesn't always go according to plan. The music helps me find meaning in the detours. Thomas set down his pen. Your technique on the Chopin was very good. Not perfect, but sensitive and musical. But your original piece, when he glanced at his fellow judges, that was extraordinary. You have a distinctive voice as a composer. That's rare. Lucia nodded in agreement. I felt every note of that. The story it told, from frustration to acceptance to something like triumph, it was beautiful. And so honest, May's breath caught in her throat. They'd understood. They'd heard exactly what she'd been trying to say through the music. Dmitry, however, still looked conflicted. Your background concerns me, he said bluntly. This competition is intense. We've seen talented people crumble under the pressure. You have no professional experience, no industry connections, no formal training beyond high school. Why should we believe you're ready for this stage? The question hung in the air, demanding an answer. May felt her initial elation fade. He was right, she was out of her depth here. Everyone else probably had degrees from prestigious conservatories, years of performance experience, professional grade recordings. But then she thought about the diner, about carrying heavy trays for 12-hour shifts, about smiling through exhaustion, about finding the strength to play music after everyone else had gone home. With respect, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice, I think I've proven I can handle pressure. For the past 8 years, I've worked 60-hour weeks while taking care of my grandmother through her illness. I've kept my music alive even when there was no audience, no recognition, no possibility of reward. If that's not dedication, I don't know what is. She paused, then added more softly, I may not have the right resume, but I have the right heart for this, and I'm willing to work harder than anyone else to deserve a chance. The three judges looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that only happens between people who've worked together for years. Finally, Dmitry nodded almost imperceptibly. Lucia smiled warmly. Thank you, May. We'll call you back shortly with our decision. As May left the stage, legs trembling with adrenaline, she had no idea if she'd just sealed her fate for better or worse. but for the first time in years she felt fully alive, as if all the parts of herself were finally in harmony. Back in the waiting room, she checked her phone to find dozens of messages from the diner crew. Mrs. Wu had sent a photo of the chalkboard sign outside Rosie's, which now read, "Home of piano star Mei Lin, watch her rise." Despite everything hanging in the balance, Mei couldn't help but smile. Whatever happened next, she'd already won something precious. She'd found her voice again and people had heard it. The call came exactly 47 minutes later. Mei and 4 other contestants were led back to the stage, where the bright lights seemed even more intense than before. They stood in a line, shoulders nearly touching, as the judges regarded them with unreadable expressions. Lucia Reyes spoke first. "We've seen hundreds of talented musicians today. Making these decisions is never easy." Thomas Harper nodded. "Each of you has something special to offer. In a perfect world, we could advance everyone with your level of skill. But this is a competition." Dmitry Volkov cut in, his accent thickening as it always did when he delivered tough news. "And in competition, choices must be made." May's heart pounded so loudly she wondered if the microphones could pick it up. The contestant beside her, a cellist with trembling hands, was breathing in short, sharp bursts. They were all feeling it, this terrible moment of suspension before the drop. "2 of you will be moving forward to the televised rounds," Lucia continued. "The other 3, while extremely talented, will end their journey with us today." A camera swooped in close, capturing their reactions. May tried to keep her face neutral, but it was hard when so much seemed to be riding on the next few words. Thomas looked down at a card in his hands. "The first contestant advancing to the televised rounds is..." The pause stretched for what felt like hours. "Jin Park, cello." The young man next to May gasped, his hands flying to his mouth. She felt a rush of genuine happiness for him, even as her own anxiety doubled. Only 1 spot left. "And the second contestant advancing is..." Another agonizing pause. May closed her eyes. Mei Lin piano, the world seemed to tilt. Had she heard correctly? She opened her eyes to see all 3 judges looking directly at her. Lucia with a warm smile, Thomas with an approving nod, and even Dmitry with what might have been the ghost of a grin. "Congratulations to our advancing contestants," Thomas said. "For those not moving forward, please know that your talent is real and valuable. This is simply one moment in your musical journey, not the end of it." What followed was a blur of activity. Papers to sign, schedules to review, publicity photos to take. Someone explained that filming for the televised rounds would begin in 2 weeks, giving contestants time to prepare new material and work with the show's music directors. "You'll need to take a leave of absence from your job," Raymond told her, as he handed over a thick packet of information. "The competition films intensively for about a month. We provide a stipend to cover basic expenses, but it's not much." When May finally stepped outside the hotel, the sun was setting. She'd been inside for nearly 12 hours, though it felt like both much longer and much shorter than that. The world looked strangely normal. People hurrying past on their way home from work, buses rumbling down the street, a hot dog vendor packing up his cart. How could everything seem so ordinary when her entire life had just changed? She pulled out her phone, which had been on silent during the final rounds. There were 37 messages waiting, most from the diner crew, a few from old friends who'd somehow heard the news, and one from her landlord complaining about a leaky pipe. Reality, intruding already. Rather than trying to answer them all, she called Mrs. Wu. "I made it," she said simply when the older woman answered. The shriek of joy that came through the phone was so loud that May had to hold it away from her ear. In the background, she could hear cheering and clapping. It seemed the entire diner staff was listening in. "When will we see you on TV?" Mrs. Wu demanded. "Not for a while. They start filming in 2 weeks, but the episodes won't air until they have several completed." 2 weeks. So much to do. You need new clothes, new hairstyle. You must practice every day. May couldn't help smiling at Mrs. Wu's enthusiasm. "I'll need to take a leave from the diner." Of course. "Your job will wait. This chance will not." On the bus ride home, May tried to absorb everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, she'd been serving coffee and clearing tables, just another face in the crowd. Now she was headed for national television, for a chance at the kind of career she'd once dreamed of but had forced herself to forget. Her apartment felt smaller than usual when she finally unlocked the door. The single room with its second-hand furniture and water stains on the ceiling seemed to belong to someone else, someone whose life was much simpler than hers had suddenly become. She sank onto the edge of her bed, exhaustion finally catching up with her. As she kicked off her shoes, her gaze fell on the framed photo of her grandmother. "I wish you could see this, Nai," she whispered. "I wish you could know that the sacrifices weren't for nothing." Sleep came quickly that night, deep and dreamless. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind. Mrs. Wu was true to her word, giving May complete freedom to prepare for the competition. The diner's old piano became her home base, though Raymond also arranged for rehearsal time at a proper studio downtown. The other diner employees stepped up in unexpected ways. Hank fixed her a special breakfast each morning, insisting that brain food was essential for practice. Zoe's roommate, who worked at the boutique, helped assemble a competition wardrobe from discount racks and clearance sales. Even the grumpy dishwasher contributed, fixing the wobbly leg on May's chair so she could practice in stability. "It's like having a whole family behind me," May told Raymond during one of their preparation meetings. "I never expected that." He nodded, unsurprised. "That's your story, May. The waitress with hidden talent supported by her community. Viewers will eat it up," she frowned slightly. "I'm not doing this for a good story. I'm doing it for the music, of course," he agreed quickly. "But in this competition, your story matters too. It's what makes people root for you, vote for you when the time comes." The day before she was due to leave for the television studios in Los Angeles, Mrs. Wu closed the diner early and threw an impromptu send-off party. The small space was packed with regulars, staff, and neighbors, all wanting to wish May luck. Mrs. Petrovich, the elderly regular who always ordered split-pea soup, pressed a small velvet box into May's hands. "For good luck," she said. "It was my mother's." Inside was a delicate silver pin shaped like a musical note. "I can't accept this," May protested, but the old woman shook her head firmly. "You bring it back when you win." "Then tell me all about it over soup." As the evening wound down, Mrs. Wu pulled May aside.
"I have something for you too."
Not as fancy, but maybe important. She handed over a yellowed envelope. Inside was a newspaper clipping, brittle with age, showing a young Chinese man seated at a piano. "My father," Mrs. Wu explained. "Before the revolution, he was concert pianist in Shanghai. When everything changed, he became factory worker, then farmer. Never touched piano again." May studied the photograph with new interest. The young man had a serious expression but gentle eyes. His hands, long-fingered and elegant, rested on the keys with obvious familiarity. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Mrs. Wu shrugged. "Some stories are hard to tell. But now you should know. When I heard you play that first night, I heard something familiar. Something that reminded me of him." Tears pricked at May's eyes. "Thank you for showing me." "Music finds its way," Mrs. Wu said simply. "Through generations, through hardship. It always finds its way." The Los Angeles studios were like nothing May had experienced before. Everywhere she looked, people rushed about with clipboards and headsets. Massive cameras wheeled around on silent tracks. Makeup artists transformed ordinary faces into television-ready versions of themselves. And the other contestants, 19 of them in all, were intimidatingly talented. During the first week of rehearsals, May sometimes wondered if there had been a mistake. How could she, with her diner piano and years away from formal training, possibly compete at this level? But when she sat down to play, those doubts faded. Music had always been her truest language, and it flowed from her fingers with a sincerity that even the most technically perfect performances couldn't always match. The competition structure was explained on their first day. Each week, contestants would perform for the judges and a live studio audience. Viewers at home would vote, along with the judges, to determine who stayed and who went home. The grand prize was a recording contract, a cash award of $100,000, and a national tour. For the first televised round, May chose to perform a piece she'd been working on since the audition, a composition inspired by her journey from the diner to this moment. She titled it Tables Turned. When the night of the first show arrived, the backstage area was chaos. Contestants paced nervously or sat in silent meditation. Makeup artists made last-minute touch-ups. Production assistants herded everyone according to a precise schedule. May wore a simple black dress with Mrs. Petrovich's silver pin attached at the shoulder. Her hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail for work, had been styled in soft waves. She barely recognized herself in the makeup mirrors. 5 minutes, May, a production assistant called, clipboard in hand. You're up after the commercial break. She nodded, taking deep breaths to calm her racing heart. This was it, the moment that would introduce her to America. Not as a waitress, but as a musician. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. As she waited in the wings, she could see the 3 judges at their table. Dimitri, stern as always. Lucia, elegant in a red gown. Thomas, thoughtfully reviewing his notes. The host, a well-known television personality with a dazzling smile, addressed the camera. Coming up next, the waitress whose viral video brought her from serving coffee to serving up amazing music. Let's see if Maylene can turn the tables on the competition. The audience applauded on cue. The floor manager signaled that they were back from commercial. And then May heard her name being called, the cue to walk onto the brightly lit stage. The piano waited at the center, gleaming under the spotlights. The audience, hundreds of people, watched expectantly. The cameras tracked her movement. Millions more would be watching at home, including everyone at Rosie's Diner. As May sat at the bench and placed her hands on the keys, a strange calm settled over her. This stage, this moment, it was just another version of the diner after closing time. A place where she could speak through music, where she could transform everyday struggles into something beautiful. She began to play. In the front row, Thomas Harper leaned forward in his seat, his expression changing from professional interest to genuine surprise as the music unfolded. Beside him, Lucia Reyes closed her eyes, letting the melody wash over her. And Dmitry Volkov, the toughest judge, the one who'd questioned May's readiness for this stage, slowly put down his pen. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the audience erupted in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the studio. Remarkable, Thomas said when he could finally be heard over the applause. Absolutely remarkable. Lucia wiped a tear from her cheek, careful of her makeup. You've shown us exactly who you are. May, a true artist with something real to say. And Dmitry, who rarely gave effusive praise, simply stood up from his chair to join the still applauding audience. In that moment, under the bright lights with music still echoing in her heart, May thought of the diner, of its checkered floors and red vinyl booths, of Mrs. Wu and Hank and Zoe, of the old upright piano in the corner that had kept her dreams alive during the hardest years. She'd been just a waitress. Now she was something more, not because she'd left that life behind, but because she'd found a way to transform it into art that could touch others. The journey ahead would have its own challenges. The competition would get fiercer. The pressure would increase. Not everyone would understand or appreciate her musical voice. But standing on that stage, accepting the judges' praise and the audience's approval, May knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was exactly where she belonged.